Daniels, I understand that you were involved with the reparations rally that took place this summer.
Well, yes, I've been a proponent of reparations ever since I encountered that outstanding warrior woman called Queen Mother Audley Moore, which was at least 35 years ago. And she decided I would be one of the candidates for a operation, because she said her job was to operate on constipated minds. And mine was constipated, and so she introduced me to reparations, and I've been working for reparations ever since. So yes, I was honored to be a part of the Millions for Reparations rally. Viola Plummer with the December 12th movement and that organization are dear friends of mine. Dr. Conrad World of the National Black United Front is a longtime ally and friend. I'm an active member of NCOBRA, so I'm very much a part of this movement for reparations for Africans in America, and indeed for Africans in the world.
Philosophically, where does the concept of reparations start? From which philosopher or which political system?
Well, I guess it begins with Aristotle, who talks about distributive versus compensatory justice. And reparations is basically a demand for compensation. So it begins with him. In the modern period, Locke developed the notion of compensation.
And he developed it based on Aristotle or based on just his own working knowledge?
Yeah, I don't know. I suspect Aristotle was there. But the basic idea is not to bandy names around, that if you've harmed somebody or taken from somebody what's his, you have to give it back. And obviously that's what's at stake in the reparations debate.
The role of reparations. In terms of individuals, reparations is important because we need to understand from what has happened to our families and our family structure. And so we need to move to repair the damage done to our family structure. So reparations is not only a demand that there be compensation for what is owed us, reparations is a responsibility of African peoples to reconcile themselves with themselves, knowing that the damage that was done in reparations was the destruction of African humanity. Slavery cannot be depicted as a few people enslaving others and Africans selling Africans into slavery. Slavery has to be seen as a diabolical scheme by the Europeans to destroy African humanity, and in the destruction of African humanity transform African humans, who are the foundation of the human family, into property, into things.
We are the most damaged of African people in the world because only in this country did we have chattel slavery, where we were actually reduced to property, like animals, like a cow, a chicken, or a horse. Everywhere else, even though slavery was brutal, you could maintain your family, you could maintain your religion. There are places throughout the world where you go, whether it's Cuba, whether it's Haiti, whether it's Brazil, where people are still speaking pure African language. All those things were taken from us. So we are the most devastated and damaged. And therefore we are entitled from this country to acknowledge the crime committed. One of the great things about the World Conference Against Racism, the various forces were able to get a resolution that the transatlantic slave trade was a crime against humanity and always should have been. We need to use that as a basis of forcing the United States to make to acknowledge, to apologize, and then there must be repair.
Until we can get a historical perspective to understand the significance of reparations, we won't appreciate it. And so when we have marches, when we have rallies, when we have lawsuits, those are only manifestations of the reparations movement. The larger question is, we have to continue this enormous struggle over the last 500 years to restore our humanity. And that's the history and the legacy of King and Malcolm and Marcus Garvey and Fannie Lou Hamer and Ida B. Wells and Harriet Tubman, struggling to restore our humanity, because the European says we weren't human, we were property. So that alone is justification for reparations, that reparations is a crime against humanity, and that for you to take the founding members of the human family and then push them out of the human family, then work them to death for your profit, is the case for reparations, pure and simple. Now we can argue this and that point and that point, but clearly the Europeans conspired together with the Catholic Church, all these European nations, to say that African peoples were not human and that we could do anything with them. And they did it for 500 years. And so we need to know that history. We've often shied away from it because it's so devastating, but we need to know it. Just as the Jews in Europe knew and understood the importance of their Holocaust, they wanted the world to know it, to say what the world owed them for allowing the destruction of their population. We need to look at that and say, oh, in a larger framework, we need to say what the world owes us because of the destruction of African peoples for hundreds of years.
I recommend every black person in America needs to read the book, The Making of a Slave. Those are the Willie Lynch speeches to show how far we got off the mark. The next thing is every black person in America needs to read The Miseducation of the Negro, okay, by Carter G. Woodson. These are the tools that we have to take and give to our young people, because from a generation on back, they have lost it. They have not heard about the things and the struggles that we have went through. And that there was a purpose in that. There was a reason in that. If we don't teach our children, if we don't give them the history, you know that the Jews don't let nobody ever forget the Holocaust. Well, every black person in America should never let our children and our families ever forget the Holocaust that we went from being here for 400 years.
In order for us to appreciate reparations, we have to understand sugar. There's a book called Sugar and Slaves. It was written by Richard Dunn, The Rise of the Planter Class in the British West Indies. But sugar and slaves was important for Brazil and the Portuguese. Sugar and slaves was important for the Dutch and their West Indian colonies. Sugar and slaves was important for the French and Haiti and other areas, Martinique and Guadeloupe. Sugar and slaves was important for the British. So until we can understand sugar and slaves, we won't understand what the enslavement system was and what was owed African peoples. When we understand that there is a war for the African mind, intellectual warfare, Dr. Jacob Carruthers, great book written by the brother, who was a partner to many of us. And this book documents the struggle for the African mind, because the reparations need to be seen in three dimensions. The system capability of Europe was developed by linking economics, politics, and culture. And in order to keep black people oppressed, the Europeans destroyed our economics, destroyed our politics, and destroyed our culture, and imposed white culture on us. So now we are in the process of reestablishing African culture, reestablishing African economics, African politics, and African culture. And so this book refers to the struggle for the mind. That relates to African culture. This book relates to restoring our cultural heritage, the pharaohs of the sun, Akhenaten, Nefertiti, and King Tut. The cultural heritage of African peoples does not begin in slavery. It goes back to the beginning of time. And so there's a cultural debt owed to African peoples. There's an economic debt owed to African peoples. There's a political debt owed to African peoples that we need to understand.
Okay, the big objection to reparations is that, first of all, those who would have to pay for it don't seem to be the ones who did or who profited from the past wrongs. That's the big argument. You have somebody whose grandfather came over from Romania in 1920. He didn't profit from slavery. He had nothing to do with slavery. And it seems very wrong to make him now in some way pay for something he had nothing to do with, or his grandson to pay for something he didn't have anything to do with and he didn't profit from.